because reality is arithmetic. The entirety of reality is the experience of a lattice, a very specific type of lattice called the harmonic divisor lattice or the harmonic divisor fan. That's one of the central pillars of the framework of organized complexity. But the lattice is in your head as well. Yeah. That's what's in your brain. That's what makes you self-aware. The fact that your brain is trying to behave like this lattice. And so you understand the reason why, from Gemini, you get Israel in some sense. It's basically from Yaakov, you get Israel. But you see, it's much deeper than that, but I'll leave it at that, And if you want a deeper understanding, you can ask the question in the comments because it's very deep and it's very beautiful. These questions, as contrasts, as lines, as intervals, as distances, as measures in general, right? They become the qualities that the third house is equipped to deal with. All right? They are everything that you can build with your mind from a logical structure like this that develops. You see that the human mind is programmed for arithmetic. It comes as a result of your sense of self, which is why it is incredible to me when I hear people say that some people evolved somewhere on this planet, especially they use that as an insult to black people, that they evolved without even understanding language or number or anything like that. This is preposterous. People think they're being insulting. They're just revealing their ignorance. And it's on a huge scale. It tells you what they want to believe. And then you ask the question why they are so motivated to believe such nonsense. Demonstrably nonsense. Provably nonsense, all right? That's another conversation. But these questions can become overwhelming. And so nature designed the process by which questions are answered. And it is very maternal. Mother is literally the physical representation of the familiarity process that grounds consciousness in conviction. So she's literally a force of nature. You understand? Which is why the ancients, they revered the symbolism of her womb, which they oftentimes associated with the head of a cow or an oxen. Because that's what it looks like when you pattern out the female reproductive system. It looks like the head of an oxen. That's where Taurus came from, the idea of it. And it's very old. Very, very old. All right? The association between Taurus and fertility and all that. But what it really is that her womb, represented as Taurus, is different from the fact that she nurtures the child. And she's the one who guides the child from that Taurus all the way down to the sign of Cancer. It's a conveyor belt. It could be the second house or the fourth house, but then the houses are now receptacles and the signs are active participants. So when there's a story told in your natal chart from the second to the fourth house, it's telling you about this relationship because it is very important. You're going to build your entire reality on that foundation. So that if for some reason the questions are not able to be answered, meaning you take questions or you try to take questions into the places where questions cannot exist, then you create a rejection, a self-rejection. And you may not know because these houses, they are pre-egoic, meaning all these things are happening before your will, represented by the dominance of the sun, emerges. And when the sun emerges in Leo, the light is too powerful and too bright that it dims all the machinations of the first to the fourth house. So even though they are within you, you can't see them anymore. The sense of self that was laid down using those dopaminergic networks alone in Taurus and pleasure, right? While you were suckling, they are different from the sense of self that is now being laid down by the powerful will of the sun. And so you can't really access them anymore. Despite the fact that they are there, they become the residual emotions that you carry. So I'll advise that if you have lots of planets in the fourth house, especially from the second to the fourth, they're very powerful. I mean, from the first, from the ascendant right there all the way to the fourth, that's the first quadrant. They are powerful because they were laid down circumstantially. They were laid down based on the environment you were born into. And then you outgrow them in a sense that you can't reach them anymore. And yet they're there, foundationally. So you can almost trace all the problems that you associate with human nature. You can trace them to this very first quadrant. And it's a story about the maternal influence of humankind. You understand? It is a very, very, very deep secret. Which is why it's stunning that, when certain religious orders emerged, they were so eager to do away with the feminine. And what do you have when you do away with the feminine? Then what exactly do you have? You just have damaged people, damaged humans and all that. So people whose sense of self is just askew, meaning people who cannot accept themselves. And so they just go into denial and they begin to play all sorts of games to cover up the denial. It's a very critical process in human psychological development, so don't play with it. When you have important placements in the second to the fourth house, or the first to the fourth house, you have to pay attention to them. They're saying a lot. And if you can afford it, you come for a synthesis. Now, so this third house has the ability to generate very rich structure. And then you now have the planet of exceptional insight potential placed in this third house. And what you have is just it's an individual whose exceptional insight making process tries to track the logic of their questioning model. One of the hallmarks of the questioning models associated with the third house, because of the way the mind evolves, is that they are sequential. That's why we can do logic. That's why we can start the edifice of mathematics by building the fundamental theorems of arithmetic. That's why you have computers. That's why you have a logic system at all, right? But nature is patterned according to the logic itself, because nature is very sequential. It is computational. So what does that mean? It means that when you are processing with your mind, in some sense, you have a very important module of your mind that is very sequential. But as the structure becomes more and more complex, something else happens. You see, the sequences themselves, the processes themselves, they begin to generate other dynamics as they come together, and then emergence occurs, so that other echoes or resonances now exist on the processes themselves. It's a very natural consequence of computational processing that it leads to these echoes. In AI models that you have today, they call them hallucinations because they don't know what they are, or maybe they do and they're just lying to everybody else. These are natural consequences of the way these networks behave. But the human brain, because of the way that this is organized, these echoes are not just random. They are the things upon which you ride exceptional insights. That is the ability to deduce fundamental structures of things in a flash. Now, it's not a very precise and accurate process because of the noise that exists in today's society, but it used to be very powerful. Which is why sages will tell you that people don't have prophecies anymore, and yet in the past people had a lot of prophecies. It's because of the noise that you call modern society and modern civilization. It attacks this sensory behavior of your brain because it doesn't know what it is, or it doesn't want to accept that it exists. So it tries to snuff it out, but you can't snuff out truth. And so there are many people who have many types of abilities in different degrees. Most people just keep it quiet because they don't need all the whatever, you know. In the days of social media, everybody's trying to be a star, so everybody's broadcasting everything now, which is good because it's not an accident. It means that the mind is ready to make a leap forward, and it's a leap of exceptional insight, which is why Pluto is in Aquarius. You've listened to my podcast on Pluto and Aquarius, where humanity is ready to make a leap of exceptional insight. But of course, like on a personal level with Uranus in the third house, some of these insights, they can be nonsensical at first. In fact, most of the time they are nonsensical because, especially in the modern age, because you have no confidence in the thing that you know. Some people just call it intuition. But what is really happening is a physical process where these resonance states, these echoes of processing, they conflate together in their own structural hierarchy, and they generate novel behavior. So there is computation upon computation upon computation upon computation. And these computations, they act in ways that appear non-local. Why? Because the lattice is non-local. It's infinity at once, in some sense. Infinite order at once, in some sense. So your brain, being a reflection of this, tries to approximate that. So you can see all in a flash, Uranus can reveal something that is so strange to you because you don't know what it is yet, you know, because it's so far ahead of you, or it's in the future, or it's in whatever it is. So people ascribe extrasensory perception to Uranus, the Uranian flavor or something like that. But it is also very disturbing. So Uranus in the third house is very, very disturbing because you are teetering on the borderline of behaviors that are so eccentric in terms of your mental models and the way that you use your mind. So you're looking at somebody who is maybe somebody who switches between genius thinking and utter foolishness. That's really what it is. Because some of the intrusions of Uranian impulses or exceptional insights, they are basically just nonsensical, and they're powerful, meaning that the tendency is to want to rely on them, especially in the third house. You know, astrology describes Uranus as a higher octave of Mercury. So you can think of Uranus in the third house as a kick into a higher vibration, because now the individual is going to seek that Uranian influence in third house matters. So they will periodically and habitually jump the rationalizing process of arithmetic or order or structure or sequence. Do you understand? The mind might be too fast, because once they see the beginnings of a story, they immediately begin to intuit how the entire logical structure of the story is. If you ask them exactly how they know, they will just tell you it's an intuition. But what it really is a high level of processing. that shortcuts or bypasses the rationalization process. It knows the rationalization process is there, but it computes at higher levels of or higher orders of interaction. If you understand what that is, you will know that it is the same property that is found in the behavior of the lattice, the arithmetic behavior of the lattice. Do you understand? So those types of systems, they require some type of dampening and control in the natal chart. Otherwise, the person begins to display some type of mental issues. Because of the type of exceptional insights that are generated spontaneously, almost like no control, right? They are very prone to individualistic thinking. Very, very prone. It's very difficult for these people to eventually get a grip on the logical process of the mind. But when they do, the results are outstanding. Because they can train that mind and they can train that exceptional insight ability. Then how does mathematics work? It works because people have interesting ideas about structures and logic and complexity. But it has to be tamed. Because if you don't understand the process in today's type of noisy environment, it just drive you insane in some way. You carry it as a cost, you know. And what that means is after a while, you begin to struggle in places where you require just simple, focused, logical thought. You jump to conclusions about everything. And the way that exceptional insight works, it's not like it delivers the wrong answers. It delivers pathways that don't make any sense. For instance, the example I used in one of my podcasts is that when the Uranian is thinking, when it hears 1, 2, 3, immediately it intuits the structure of numbers. Or if it hears ABC, immediately it knows that there must be an XYZ in some sense. It just feels the structure intuitively, but it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it can feel, it can hear ABC and it feels RST, or it feels MTU, and it doesn't know what that pattern is, but it knows that the pattern is important, but it doesn't know what it is. And so it carries that as a resource that is tied down, because you have to represent that in your head. And so within the Uranus in the third house person, you have a lot of structures that are incomplete, patterns of memory and patterns of understanding that just don't make any sense at the moment. Because what Uranus does is that it builds enough exceptional insight so that it can construct Aquarius. And Aquarius is in your head, is a pattern of self in your head that develops, a pattern of neurons and connections and all that. It is building the vision there. But until the vision is complete, it really doesn't know what that vision is. So as the vision begins to crystallize, it begins to resonate more and more with Aquarian ideals. And the person may not even understand why. All right. So Uranus in the third house has potential for intellectual brilliance, but the problem is that the mind is already very fast. This is like jacking it up. All right. Now, Uranus in the third house is far easier than Neptune in the third house because Neptune is the highest light from the solar system. So by the time you have Neptune in the third house, the behavior of that third house, it jacks up to the point where it begins to approach infinite complexity. And at that stage, intuition begins to blur the difference between reality and fiction or reality and imagination. And when this progresses to a sufficient level, the individual may not know the difference between the two anymore. The downside is that you need to be able to understand reality to function. So you need your mind, your logical mind. The upside is that in today's reality where you can imagine something that can even make you a lot of money or make you very wealthy or give you a type of gift that now becomes recognized, right? But it is not easy to achieve because just like I said, Saturn is difficult to control, all right? Because it's Saturn, it provides a retraction that you now need to sit in Capricorn, all right? And that Uranus is even more difficult because it's like electricity. It flashes here and there. It's difficult to grab a hold of and train and discipline. Neptune is even worse because there's nothing to grab. The entire mind just tries to mush into one all the time. Sequential logic is so difficult, and yet these are people who can imagine what all sequential logic is supposed to mean. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of it, so their mind becomes more musical or more spiritual in that sense with Neptune in the third house. Because think of it as instead of jumping the steps sequentially like you would have maybe when Saturn is there, or learning to do this when Saturn is there. With Uranus there, you can jump different haphazard types of steps as you move forward. With Neptune, all the steps blur together. So you can't even see where, you just see the entire structure in your face every time you try to look for the sequential logic of it. So that means that you're very good at seeing the holistic nature of things. So such people with Neptune in the third house, they're drawn to such holistic things. They feel the unity of the universe and the unity of things. They feel it, If they have a constructive outlet for that, they can become extremely good scientists, researchers at least, who can feel the questions in nature that they need to ask. Okay? especially because Neptune allows you to drift. You have to be careful because you're drifting on nothingness. You're surfing the edge of nothingness. And if you don't know what you're doing, you might fall into nothingness, which leads to basically wasted time, wasted effort, because Neptune is nothing, but it's also everything. All right. That's really what it is. So contrast that with Uranus in the third house, which by the time maturity sets in and innovation begins to try to sit, because obviously Uranus in the third house, the main question is directed towards the self. What is it that makes me special? And the individual will search for that within their mind. They'll be looking for ways to distinguish themselves, but their mind is also jacked up towards the ideals of Aquarius. And I told you that Aquarius is a fundamental instinct of truth because of the need for freedom. Aquarius doesn't like chains. It doesn't like things that block and things like that. It believes that it has exceeded that. All right. So Uranus in the third house, people keep using their minds to try to escape whatever it is that they see as blockages or restrictions in their reality. And this brings a certain level of deviousness to the whole thing because, you have geniuses, but you also have evil geniuses in that sense, right? So they kind of share this type of quality of mind, It's very important that the Aquarian understands that the vision that you're building in, or the Uranian in the third house understands that the vision that you're building is for Aquarius. And Aquarius is a very lofty sign. Now, doesn't mean that Aquarius is all go. Aquarius can become a type of insanity when, the ideal now replaces the reality completely in the sense that it doesn't care about people anymore, even though the structures that it builds are all about people. That's an unbalanced Aquarius. That's because the gap we talked about from the fourth house is still being carried. It is unresolved. And so Scorpio is a kind of place of reckoning in the evolutionary dynamics of the zodiac, where it is hard to carry lies through Scorpio because it will leave an imprint. For instance, busted relationships. Now, a lot of people have busted relationships. No, these relationships, they are transformative. They seem to occupy a position of immense importance in the life story. So they can twist it one way or the other. All right. And that's because of that gap. So I repeat, if you have second house to fourth house planets or Taurus to Cancer planets, there's a conveyor belt operating there, and the conveyor belt is meant to deliver something that closes a gap. But if that is not done correctly, then you have all sorts of problems growing up from these things, But usually there's no intent or design of building problems into a natal chart. No, usually stresses are created in some areas because they represent raw materials for the processing in other areas. And altogether, the system is balanced. It is complete and it is good. All right. So it's enough for you to go and start telling your story. Of course, the system takes into consideration your history, where you're coming from. You are just the latest iteration of a story that has been unfolding. So it's now your turn to write. You are presented with your ancestral book, and then you begin to write. Try to write good stories, because they matter. Modern reality tries to teach us that they don't matter. They matter. Your past is literally the stories that have been written. Your present is you writing the stories. You are aware of your past. At least that's the entire design before the history of the world was corrupted and changed. So you have people now who don't know where they come from. They don't even know what they are. So humans exist in a state where they don't know anything. So what kind of future do you think you're going to forge? Well, a future of nonsense, which is why everyone is just producing mostly nonsense, you see? Because the confusion that creates is profitable to some people. Uranus in the third house is a system, a mindset that is constantly trying to break this type of system. So naturally, it exhibits some type of anarchy. It's like an agent for disorder. And this disorder, the individual will, if they don't know what is going on, they will spread that disorder into the verbal communicative space that is indicated by the third house. And they will unsettle things in many different ways. But what they're doing is they're really reacting to a system that they perceive as being trying to confine them. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of mental resources being drained by such things. Resources that could have been channeled and disciplined towards something else. Because as the higher octave of Mercury, Uranus in the third house has an extraordinary potential for intellectual brilliance. Do you understand? It's very, very important. But it needs structure, it needs discipline. Otherwise, it's just madness. All right. Mercury is like a trickster in some sense. It's the need for tricks and just like a game of wits and competitiveness in some sense, but existing on an intellectual level. So that's really what it is. All right. So Uranus in the third house, the kind of inquiry that it brings is that it becomes an inquiry that is driven by futuristic concerns. But like I said, it's not just about futuristic concerns. It's the fact that the person can see intuitively into the future. So they have the potential for prophetic alterations and things like that. But like I said, most of the time it's all nonsense because there's no rhyme or reason to it until the full structure comes into view. So one of the ways to cope with Uranus in the third house is that you must understand what is going on in your mind, what is going on in your head, and how the circuits are firing. And once you do that, you realize that you are, in some sense, because you use your mind to define yourself, you are in some sense telling a story that you're in control of in some sense. And the Uranus is basically a speed of perception that exists between the two aspects of Gemini. So that if that speed is continuous enough, then they're able to see almost simultaneously both aspects of things, the interval, and ascribe meaning to it. Neptune in the third house, you can't even see the interval anymore. The speed of transmission occurring between the duality of the twins is so fast, it is permanent. So the individual sees things from a holistic point of view. That's how they understand it more. And people with Neptune in the third house, they are very drawn to nature, natural things, because that's how nature expresses itself. It finds solutions that are good for everything, not just one thing. All right? It's a very important thing that the modern society is still trying to learn. It has all these individual solutions for different things, but altogether it's just noise, it's nonsense. So modern society is literally the largest creation of junk in human history. On individual levels, these junk things are useful. But as a collective aggregate, it's a contamination of the planet, because what are you going to do with all the billions of mobile phones that have been created? Billions of cars, these are manufactures from Earth's natural resources. So you're converting Earth's natural resources, which sustain life on Earth as a living planet. You're converting them into things that the Earth cannot use. Junk. It has no functional form to nature. So when you dig a landfill, you bury billions of iPhones and everything. Nobody has dug a hole on this earth, and there have been some deep mines where they find buried technology from the past, like a landfill. Nobody. What that means is that nobody has experienced the level of craziness that you have today. Nobody. In Earth's history, or at least maybe even if it were, it would have been so long ago, nature has cleared the history from the record. You know, so some of the places you have on Earth today, they used to, that dry land, for instance, the Sahara Desert, for instance. I mean, you have whale bones there and seashells and all that. It means that at some point in time, this place was a seabed or a lake bed. So nature knows how to bury things, but, you know, I was just trying to give you the understanding that we are converting the natural resources of the planet into unusable junk. And we're doing it at an accelerating rate and then calling it progress. When the natural Uranian mind, that is Uranus in the third house, when they meet this type of reality, there is a revolt. It clashes with an important aspect of themselves. They see it as utmost stupidity, and they're not wrong. And that's because once the vision in Aquarius is constructive, or being constructed properly and truthfully, a vision of a higher reality begins to emerge, because it's a perception of the world, of reality at such a high level because of the exceptional insights. So you're now looking at systems and organizations rather than just individual people, and you look at the system that converts natural resources, irreplaceable natural resources, into junk, and you see it as what it is. This is extremely foolish. That's why many people with Uranus in the third house, they become sort of like vocal advocates for change. They're very disruptive. They are. You see? Because they just rebel. Because what the hell is this? And then if you can really get them to explain the thinking behind their rebellion, well, you probably listen to it and it may seem like ultra jazz to you, right? If you are a conformist in some sense. But they have a logic system underlying this thing. And when they discipline themselves well enough, they'll be able to sequentially describe the logical system. That is where the brilliance comes from. So the brilliance sits as a potential, but you have to develop it. And when you're in a relationship with somebody with Uranus in the third house, oh my goodness, you just know that you're going to be defending yourself from verbal attacks. It's like a constant barrage, because the person has a kind of, when they direct that Uranian insight thing into another human being, they just be picking out all your patterns, and they'll pick each and every one of them out. They don't really know how the entire pattern fits together, but they will pick out the individual variations of patterns, and they will tell you about the stupidity or the uselessness of it all. The worst part of this dynamic is that they are likely very correct. So even though they don't see the overall pattern, they'll be able to see the important junctions or intervals or areas of nuisance or whatever it is, and they'll call it out, because there's no sensitivity in the Uranian placement. It is a group structure, a group awareness. So the individual personal feeling doesn't really matter. So they can come across as very cold in their verbal assessment of others, very insightful and quite disruptive. You understand? So depending on whatever is motivating the questioning self, if there's a lot of heat in the questioning self, that is a lot of Martian or Aryan energy attached and used to support this, oh my goodness. They struggle in relationships because they talk themselves into the relationship and then talk themselves out of the relationship. The truth is that they don't want to be in anything. They want to be free. But until that awareness settles down and dawns on them all over the place, and they're clever enough to construct all manners of denials. So Uranus in the third house needs to be disciplined, it needs to be trained so that it can merge the best of both worlds. The sequential logic arrangement of the third house and the exceptional insights that Uranus provides an opportunity for. And that way brilliance can emerge. All right. In terms of, they're drawn to, obviously, things that look futuristic and advanced. Why? Because, if you're building a vision is something that exists in the future once you're building it. Nobody sensibly builds a vision of the past in some sense. Maybe through research and all that. But a visioning thing is very idealistic. It is usually encoded in some type of expectation value of the future. So you see how things can become better. You see how people can become better. You see how systems in general, there are a lot of systems in the modern reality. Computer systems are one of them. So people with Uranus in the third house, they can work with computer systems in ways that allow them to experience their revolutionary, independence, eccentric type of mindset. Any type of constraint or some type of imposition, it doesn't matter what it is. Once they smell it, they rebel against it. It's almost like they live to rebel against systems. And yet, within their vision, they are building a system. It's interesting, isn't it? It's the speed of thought or the potential for the speed of thought. But you see, Uranus is not accurate in the sense that sequential logic is accurate. It's a flash within a space. The space is multidimensional. The flash usually proceeds along various trajectories in a multidimensional space. But what it all means, most likely the person doesn't know. Why do you think prophecies are very difficult to understand or to describe? It's because the information is being retrieved at a level that is extremely high. And it doesn't really pay attention to the confines or the constraints of space-time because that is sequential. Time ticks sequentially. So the information retrieval process that depends on resonances upon resonances upon resonances, like a tunneling effect or like the production of some type of catastrophe. And if you didn't have blackness in your brain could not do this. Yeah, because even if you are tunneling, you must collapse it into order to retrieve the information. Otherwise, it's noise. Noise is defined by such a high dimensional space. You can't retrieve any real information from there, which is why I started working on the 5 principles of organized complexity, because I'm describing a system, a natural system, how nature retrieves order from chaos. The order itself is living in the chaos. It's there. It doesn't come out until the retraction force retracts it into blackness. That's a collapse of some kind. So once things become too complex, too chaotic, and they just collapse, that's the retraction force. That's what Saturn does in the natal chart. It's a force because it's conditional. Order above, structure above, because you're a living human being, so you are a living structure. All right, without structure you couldn't be. Okay, so that's really what it is.